Welcome to Week 2. This week we're going to be talking about electronic exhibits. We'll be discussing video and video editing in a later class. It's a busy week, and so you might want to refer to the PDF version of the presentation or give me a call or email if you have questions. Our Week 2 goals are to learn about the issues surrounding exhibits, such as what factors should a trial tech consider when evaluating exhibits, how data travels through the EDRM, common danger signs to listen for from the legal team, branding, redaction, and unitization considerations and best practices, creating time estimates for legal team planning, organization and documentation of exhibits and files by the trial tech and legal team, PDF versus TIFF considerations when choosing an exhibit format, the role of the gatekeeper, what a log file is for TIFF image loads in your presentation tool of choice, crafting a trial management order to memorialize exhibit decisions made with opposing counsel, and how to cooperate with opposing counsel and watch for burden shifting. There are so many things to consider before you put your first exhibit into your presentation system of choice. The typical problem areas are redaction, unitization, and branding because they can be complex tasks and take a lot of time. The initial considerations that we are speaking about here should help you start to gauge how much work your case will need so that you can provide the legal team with accurate time estimates for planning, preparation, budgeting, and staffing. As a new tech, if you can get a small trial or arbitration and do the exhibit exchange in PDF, you have a great opportunity, but if you go too far outside of your skill set and comfort zone, you might be asking for trouble. In sum, evaluating the technical needs of your case before you present your first exhibit in court is an absolutely critical component to trial planning. The initial considerations are the size of case, so you want to make sure there's not a disconnect between the legal team and the tech team as to what their concept of what a small case or big case is. Lots of small cases have big case needs when it comes to technology. Branding, redaction, and unitization. So what are the legal team and court's preferences for branding? And making sure that the legal team in court doesn't set you up for failure by creating an overly complex branding scheme. How much redaction? How much unitization does your documents need in your case? How much video is in your case? Will you be playing videos on the fly or having to sync videos? What's the technical difficulty of your case, and what format are your images in now? So will you be converting from native format or some other image format into your exhibit format? Tracking. How will you maintain version control of exhibits, and how will exhibits be tracked via a project plan? The pace of the case. Is there going to be a lot of requests or a few requests? Long time to prepare or last minute? And last, support. Is the case staffed appropriately? And do you have the equipment to do the job? Through the EDRM, we have been reducing data. We call any electronic record that has been collected ESI, or electronically stored information, like a Word, Excel, email, AutoCAD, or other electronic files. Looking to the left of the green presentation phase on the far right, let's start with the preservation and collection phase of the EDRM, which is in purple, and where the exhibits probably first entered the law firm. The files were processed into a database and reviewed in the blue section. By processed, what I mean is that a vendor took the ESI and converted or processed it into a separate database record and image. The purpose of the image is to memorialize the document as it was and guard against accusations of tampering. TIFF images are also easier to brand and exchange rather than a native file. Sometimes we get a database record and a native file instead of an image. A native file is the ESI in its original format. The documents are reviewed and analyzed by the legal team, and a subset of the reviewed and issue-coded records is eventually produced. Typically, a small set of files is chosen out of the produced records to become exhibits, which likely means the exhibits will be processed a second time for exhibit branding or to put a different image format for exchange. But the work really is just beginning. We'll be talking shortly about the differences between a trial exhibit database created for use by the legal team and a trial presentation database for use by the trial tech. As you saw in the previous EDRM slide, the arrows don't go just one way. The EDRM is an iterative process, and sometimes you take a step backwards. Creating exhibits is that step backwards where you might reconsider decisions made about the documents, branding, naming conventions, and unitization. You might even revisit processing decisions made at earlier stages of your case to ensure your exhibit looks as good as possible. Some examples of that are processing a document again in color if it was originally processed in black and white, or reprocessing an Excel spreadsheet to view formulas or get a better looking exhibit. Regardless, all of the production records selected as exhibits will likely be branded again with the trial exhibit number. This is a good time to remind your legal teams that they should start using exhibit numbers to reference documents in their own trial prep. You should also consider how you will organize data on your network for shared use and how you will organize it on your presentation laptop for tech use. We'll go over some suggestions for that shortly. Being able to provide a time rule of thumb to legal teams so that you can manage team expectations is very important. Legal team members will often ask to undertake tasks without knowing the full impact of their request. Their impression was that we'd just punch up some issue codes and the task would be automated and easy, which is simply not accurate. In the case of video, it can take 3 to 4 times the clip length in order to edit it. That means a 10-minute video being edited can take 40 minutes or more. Think about it. You have to identify the page and line range, remove any sections that were requested, and then review for objections and other colloquy for removal. And then don't forget, you need to do the QC of the video clip by viewing it. You can create video clips without reviewing internal content fairly quickly, but do you want to? Not reviewing the clip doesn't sound like good QC, does it? Legal team members need to prioritize and use discretion when assigning tasks so that the tech can manage the workflow. Communication needs to flow 2 ways so that everyone is on the same page as to what needs to go on screen and when. It is wise as a tech to push back at times and ask for clarification and prioritization of tasks. Here is the process presented another way visually that categorizes what happens to ESI on its path from being collected to becoming an exhibit. As you see in the collection stage, we're collecting raw data from people's computers and servers and other data sources. And that's the source data for all databases used all the way to trial. The document review database is where the ESI, the raw ESI, raw collected data, is processed and placed so that it can be issue coded and reviewed for responsiveness. Those records are later branded with production numbers and placed into a production database, and that's where the exchanged information is placed between the various parties in a lawsuit. Then you may further categorize the data into a trial exhibit database, which is an area for legal team analysis, redaction, unitization, and branding. It's basically the working database for blowbacks, binders, and tracking of exhibits. And then finally, the trial presentation database, which is the trial presentation software, and it's for trial tech use only. It's where the trial tech performs and creates all their own work product for use in presentation in court. Next, I'm going to talk to you about danger signs. These are things the legal team says and does that sets off red flags for me as the trial tech. The first is, I'm going to blow these back and rescan them. What the legal team is suggesting here is that we reunitize the documents on paper and then scan them back in as a replacement record. The practical effect is that you lower the quality of exhibits, similar to how photocopying the same file over and over tends to lower its quality. I'll run these through our branding utility 3 times to comply with the branding requirements. This is telling me that the branding requirements are overly complex or that I don't have the right software to do the job. Each time you brand, you might be shrinking the document a little more, and you don't want to do that. I'm going to convert the image from X format to Y format. I'm going to improve the images, and I'm going to straighten and sharpen everything. Any bulk task with the exhibits needs to be highly tested. You want to ensure that the change of format is accurate both in size, color, and quality. Unless illegible, you may want to reconsider leaving docs or improving docs and leaving them as they are so that there is no suggestion of document tampering. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Go ahead and fix their exhibits is another thing they say. It's no big deal, right? Well, what they're doing is they're doubling the workload of the trial team to do their own work and the work of the other trial team. So they're not really considering the ramifications of that effect on their own work product. Strong teams will not accept documents that are not compliant with agreed upon exchanges that are memorialized in the trial management order. If it is a continuing problem, it should be brought up with the judge. Last, it's just 2 weeks. Why do you need another person? We all need sleep and can pull some all-nighters, but there is a point where that is unreasonable on the trial presentation team, and additional staffing should be considered. The small case. A quick word about the small case. Technical needs are not connected to legal needs in a case. Therefore, when an attorney says a case is small, even with a small data set, it can still have big case needs. For example, there could be hundreds of video clips or hundreds of documents that need to be reunitized, or there could be no budget for vendor services forcing you to get creative and figure out how to make exhibits. It can be a team that asks you, as the example before, to fix all of opposing counsel's technical issues. So you have to look at tasks and workload in conjunction with time estimates for tasks. Then you can determine if it's a big case or a small case for the tech team. Now we're going to talk about document authenticity. Imagine for a moment the situation where one side puts up an exhibit and it is perfect and straight and without imperfection. You might think that is what we should be doing as techs, right? Now imagine the other team puts up the same exhibit that shows its imperfections. It might be less clear, but it's clearly authentic. Might some jurors think the documents have been tampered with? Document authenticity is a strategy where exhibits are presented in as original state as possible. The imperfections show decision makers that we are credible and honest because we haven't manipulated the exhibits. Teams should consider how much they want to improve documents through bulk processes, and even individualized ones. Moreover, techs certainly shouldn't decide on their own, unless you're the attorney-tech, combination attorney-tech, if their exhibits should be changed or not, and instead should present this strategy as a consultative option. In other words, you need to go to your legal team decision makers and make sure that they're okay with you correcting those records and straightening them and making them wider and brighter before you undertake any process. Let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about the different databases these exhibits might go into. The trial exhibit database is the working database used by the legal team to prepare documents for trial and research. It's also the working location where electronic files are modified by branding and unitization prior to being imported into the tech's trial presentation database. The trial presentation database is used by the tech to present exhibits in court. It is a mirror copy of the trial exhibit database, but used solely by the tech as a source for exhibit presentation. The trial presentation database is where exhibits might be staged in advance along with callouts and highlighting. In order to maintain version control, we often assign a single gatekeeper to perform all redactions and modifications to exhibits and have a plan in place for any emergency or last-minute needs while the tech or the second chair is away. The backup for the hot seat we call the second chair, but you can call them a backup or a second chair. But they're the person that does the work while the hot seat or primary person or trial tech is sleeping or getting some shut-eye or some much-needed rest. The legal team simply must take version control and notification of the tech as a top priority because this is a primary area where trial issues happen. Even an email at 2 a.m. may not be a sufficient method of notifying a tech about an exhibit modification done while the gatekeeper is away. The exhibit should be put in the tech's hand or confirmed in some way that he has it or she has it. We'll be talking about exhibit organization shortly, so when we talk about the addendum folder, pay particular attention. Version control. Version control is about ensuring that the right version of the exhibit ends up on screen. It is one of the most prevalent problems and really can occur in a handful of ways. Either the message never made it to the tech, or the gatekeeper to redact an exhibit, or there was a version control issue. This means that someone likely worked outside of whatever workflow that has been established, or the exhibit never made its way to the tech. Again, a violation of the workflows that should be set up on every team. One-off tasks must be kept to a minimum and very rigid communication standards in place, along with reminders that changes have been made outside of the workflow. An email sent in the middle of the night in a sea of hundreds of others may not be noticed. In a few slides, I'll show you how I organize files. Successful version control equals communication plus central location plus team education. Version control must contemplate a central location to keep and modify exhibits with communication to let the tech know changes have been made. So typically, that is an exhibit database. So you keep and modify exhibits using an exhibit database as the version control system. The alternative is a single folder location on a network storage device of some kind. You must also contemplate keeping a pristine set of images without modification so that the tech can go back if there are any further changes necessary to any given exhibit. So what happens is that you brand an exhibit with an exhibit number, and later the legal team changes their mind and decides to put a different one in its place. So they say, forget that one, we haven't submitted to the court yet, brand this one exhibit 23, and the one that used to be 23 is now 24. So you need the pristine set in order to do that. The gatekeeper. Consider only authorizing a very small amount of people or a single person to redact exhibits. Discuss how to handle exhibits when the gatekeeper is not available. Again, I can't stress enough how this is the primary area where mistakes happen. You know, some exhibit falls through the cracks and it doesn't end up in the system, or someone makes a change to an exhibit, a redaction usually, and that redaction doesn't make it to the trial tech because the person wasn't thinking and they just used it for a printout. Well, if you don't get that redacted version, they may present unredacted records on screen, and that's a big deal. That can get everyone in trouble. Communication. Tech must be aware of any changes to exhibits. It must be a top team priority and understanding. If you don't tell the tech that the exhibit was changed, and again, that wrong exhibit or unredacted exhibit goes up on screen, it's bad, and it can be very embarrassing and get everyone in a lot of trouble. So it's a big deal, and that's one of the reasons why I say put the information in the person's hand. Get confirmation of some kind that they received it and that it's in their system. If you've been at trial for a week or two, you may even want to ask them a couple of times because people are exhausted. Make sure that you get the confirmation that it was received. And then maybe a naming scheme to control exhibits that have been redacted. So, for example, you could put an R in the exhibit name to show redacted. So the unredacted version would not have an R in it, and the redacted version would have an R in it. So organizing exhibits and other files. Firms would be wise to consider matter-centric organization of their data. So what that means is that you organize by client, and then matter, and then application. You can it provides working locations to the various teams working on a given case. It's a centralized location for exhibits and applications, and you want to be careful where you don't create an environment where exhibits are everywhere. So people start creating working files and subfiles and some on their local computer. And when that happens, things really start to get wild and things fall through the cracks. And that's where, again, those really embarrassing mistakes occur, and we don't want that to happen. So keep the exhibit centralized. If you're doing redactions or putting some level of branding and it's a team environment, make sure they're working in all the same place. The best way to do that is a exhibit database, but if you don't have an exhibit database like concordance or relativity or summation, then have a centralized folder and use PDFs and read everyone the riot act so that they don't put files all over the place and people get confused as to what the right version is. And then last, and your IT folks are going to love me for saying this, but try not to use punctuation in the file name, as it can cause problems with pathing to exhibits and video. So this is true mostly in transcripts, and also the Windows file and folder path information. Try not to put that punctuation because it can cause problem with linking between your trial presentation software and wherever that video is. Keep in mind that the trial presentation software in most cases is merely a link to somewhere else, and so if there's a problem with that path, the exhibit's not going up. So here's an organization example for the hot seat computer. Organize your case by application and along with a folder for exhibits. We typically start the case with a folder called Exhibits that can contain up to 1,000 pages or images per folder. There could be hundreds of folders depending on the size of the case, and I don't like to go over 1,000 files per folder because it might cause performance issues with the Windows operating system. This structure should be replicated onto the trial presentation laptop and backup laptop, as well as external drives and network storage. You want to keep the same organizational structure so that if you have a computer problem, you can simply change the paths in your trial presentation tool of choice and keep on moving forward. Don't forget that pristine sample of your source docs in case there's a technical issue with the work product and you need to renumber, or other kinds of problems that pop up, so you'll need to go back to the drawing board. Last, you'll want to keep in mind that people will need to know about how you organize your data and where, so keep a project plan that describes this information. After all, you might win the lottery and head for Hawaii, or you could just get the flu during trial, so you want people to be able to pick up where you left off at a moment's notice. And here's another organizational example. I wanted to show the detail of how I organize exhibits received after the initial run of files into the exhibit folder. So, I've received the exhibits, I create a folder called Exhibits, and the initial run of exhibits goes into there. But throughout the case, you're going to be receiving exhibits daily, maybe even a couple times a day. And what I like to do is I create a folder called Addendum to add any exhibit that comes after that initial exhibit folder creation. And it's organized by date. I like this organizational structure, especially in a team environment, because it lets me know what new exhibits have been added when I come into the office in the morning. So that's in the case if I have a backup or second chair working. I go back to the hotel if I'm lucky and get some shut-eye, and the person's working on exhibits through the night continue to work, and they would add any new exhibits to a dated folder. I come in early in the morning, and then I know exactly what I need to add to my trial laptop. And again, just to be clear, these are files that have already been processed. You should have a pristine set, similarly organized in the office. So I'm going to talk now about the gatekeeper. Data comes from every direction. Big or small, every team should have a gatekeeper, even if that means someone is wearing multiple hats. The gatekeeper manages the intake and processing of data so that it is handled in a consistent way from processing to branding. Teams that handle data in an ad hoc or unorganized way are in for trouble when exhibits aren't provided to the trial tech on time, or are forgotten, or even worse, when they are the wrong version of an exhibit. So for example, the unredacted version of an exhibit, or more likely not getting the exhibit to the trial tech at all. That's the one-off problem that we discussed before. So looking at the role of the gatekeeper, data can come from a variety of sources and individuals, both on and off the team. So someone might get, like the paralegal might get an external hard drive, or the lawyer might get a box of paper, or more likely an email with a bunch of exhibits attached to it. Someone can get them FTP'd. And so you want that gatekeeper to prepare things in a consistent way to comply with any agreements you have with the other side in the court. And you don't want them treated in a one-off way where it's inconsistent with that. The team definitely needs to know what to do if the gatekeeper is not available. So how will exhibits be handled, and how should everyone on the team work together to make sure that the trial tech gets that exhibit? Because things happen when they're not there. The trial tech going to sleep or something shouldn't stop the entire team from working. It should also, encompass notification of the trial tech for any one-offs, and that gatekeeper really should be a dedicated role to a very select group of people who understand and get why it's so important. You basically, for successful workflow, you want to set up a little factory that churns out exhibits the same way every time. There will be some exhibits that require an inordinate amount of individual attention, so the more time you spend at the beginning perfecting and communicating your process, the better. So what you're trying to do is make a repeatable process that works the same way every time. You want specialization in tasks so that any details of the trial management order instructions on exhibit branding or unitization are followed to a T. You need to, again, educate your team on version control issues and communication. It needs to acknowledge exceptions with strict rules, and QC steps definitely have to be part of the workflow. Documentation. So I like to keep documentation about exhibits that I can review outside of the trial presentation program. So that's an Excel spreadsheet that I typically print out and have in my folder next to me at the computer. Besides being organized and having mastery of my case data, it gives me options if my computers are busy, or a quick guide during court to reference pagination. In addition, the trial exhibit database, again not to be confused with the trial presentation database, should be used by the legal team to track admitted status of exhibits and other useful info. Sometimes this goes to the trial tech, but in my experience, it's the paralegal that does this kind of tracking, or an attorney of some kind. So you want to create a document that tracks the exhibit numbers, number of exhibit pages, your video naming conventions, video clip names with page line references. You also want to track in your trial exhibit database whether an exhibit has been admitted or not, that date, and the admitting party. I think that's the bare minimum. There's all sorts of other things you can track, but I think I would start here and find out what works with your team. So attached are my exhibit rules, and these are some of the rules for exhibit and log file naming. Many of the items mentioned here are about speeding up the input process so exhibits make it to screen faster. In other words, the less digits you need to type, the faster items will come to screen. That's why naming conventions are so important in the trial management order. The first rule is that file name equals exhibit number, so that you get a consistent load file without alias issues. When the exhibit number equals the file name, it also makes it easier to find a file for QC, troubleshooting, or exchange. No spaces is because if you have a file name with spaces, you might input the number of blank spaces wrong, requiring another keying in of the file name that you just tried to input, and you keep having to guess until you get it right. In other words, the tech needs to make this as clear as possible, this being the naming structure. The underscore and dash are extra keystrokes which only slow you down, as well as potential confusion in trying to figure out how to key in the underscore and dash on exhibits. Look for consistency. Don't have different naming formats or padding of numbers for exhibits. Consistency is your friend. Keep that in mind, and when you are stressed or in a panic, the info will come back to you. Branding and naming considerations. So KISS, the whole KISS method, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Teams often make bad decisions on naming conventions for exhibits. Specialized branding requires specialized techniques and software, which is typically vended out to your favorite vendor. It creates a roadblock to timely turnaround of exhibits. So it makes sense, right? Less rules for exhibit branding on your document, the faster it's going to go. The more rules that you have and technical requirements, the slower it's going to go. And that's the same for your naming requirements as well. If you create a crazy name for your exhibits and exhibit branding, it's going to take you longer to input it in and to create in the exhibit creation process. Here's some examples. People sometimes put, page 1 of 5, page 3 of 5, page 5 of 5 in some corner of the document. Maybe they only brand the first page, maybe multiple locations on the document. They create overly complicated naming conventions like, let's name all the plaintiff exhibits PLT and the defendant exhibits DEF, and then the witness initials, the doc ID, and the page number. I mean, it really does get crazy how technical people, over technical people get in this subject. Keep it simple, and things will progress quickly and efficiently. Always use the exhibit number. So the legal team should ensure that outlines and references used, especially in court, refer to the exhibit number and not any previous numbers on the document face. Warning: legal teams often neglect to understand the difference between a page number on a document and the exhibit and page number on a document. Always get your team organized around the exhibit page numbering. This creates a consistent record and reduces confusion as to which page to go for judge and jury. It also creates a common reference point the entire legal team should understand so that they can communicate efficiently amongst themselves. For example, if one team member references this doc as 247 and the other DEF 649, there are bound to be obvious problems. So, as you can see from the example here, there's a number of numbers on the face of the document, and people create their outlines sometimes months in advance and refer to the old numbers, and this can create a big problem once you get to court. Use consistent data padding as well upon the numbering the exhibits and based upon the highest page count. This is usually 4-4, meaning 4-digit exhibit number and a 4-digit page number. If you have a larger or smaller number of maximum exhibits and pages, adjust accordingly, but do plan ahead in case of expansion. So it's this inconsistency in numbering that can cause people data input issues. You're keying in the number for the exhibit to bring it up on screen, so you don't want to have different length padding for your exhibit numbers and your page numbers. So just do something consistent and you'll be fine. If you really want to get tricky, be sure to remember our alias discussion for ease of data entry. You could remove the trial exhibit number from the front of all exhibits so that you can input the number faster. For example, TX1234, which is exhibit 1234, 0035, which is page 35 of the exhibit, can become 1234-0035, meaning you don't have to do the TX, making it a little bit quicker on data entry. It makes a notable difference, but don't worry about it until you are comfortable with that skill. And we'll be talking about alias and log file in a second. Redaction. So redaction safeguards sensitive information by removing or blocking it from a document. It's typically done by placing a large black box over the sensitive text. If you use a white box, it may look as if you are hiding something unless it is clearly identified as redaction. Information can be personal, like Social Security and credit card numbers, or blocked by court order or motion. Redaction markings should be accurate, consistent, and not cover any unredacted text to the extent possible. So you want to be very neat and consistent. You don't want to cover the wrong stuff. Unitization. So unitization is the changing, addition, reordering, or deletion of pages from a document. Documents are often unitized into exhibits. So a team might take a couple different documents and boil it down to a single exhibit. And that process is called unitization. Teams should consider the amount of unitization necessary at trial, as it can be a substantial burden on the tech team. And really just consider, is it more practical to include the entire doc rather than going through the reunitization process? The amount and ease of document unitization should be a consideration for your case. It can take 5 to 20 minutes per document with QC and complexity of changes. That's one benefit to using PDFs, because they're a little bit easier to unitize and redact. They're portable, and they can be viewed on anyone that downloads the free viewer. But they do multiply like rabbits and are hard to maintain version control over. So exhibit format choices are one of the most difficult choices you'll make during the preparation and planning of your case. One of the most basic choices a tech needs to make is what image format to use in their trial presentation database. If you are lucky, you will have the same image format in both your team's trial exhibit database and the tech's trial presentation database. But often strategic decisions are made as to which format to use, so I created this handy infographic for you. I think for the beginner tech or hot seat, that PDF is the clear winner for use in trial presentation tools. But it becomes more of a toss-up as your case or exhibit size gets bigger. The primary issue with PDF files is that due to them being a single file, they can become quite large in file size, causing a lag time in presentation. So in many ways, it is case and equipment specific as to whether PDFs will work for you. So if you have not so great equipment and big old PDF files, your equipment will probably crash. And even if you have pretty good equipment or even great equipment, if you have enough big PDFs in your exhibit database, you may just crash the system. So you need to be really careful with that. On the other hand, TIFF files tend to be small in file size, so they offer better performance. In some cases, the PDF file size becomes so big that you're either splitting the PDFs all day or crashing because they overwhelm your laptop's capabilities. Quick side note, you should be constantly testing your laptop's capabilities by cycling through numerous exhibits, perhaps every exhibit, to make sure they come up and to ensure that they don't create technical issues and crashes. There are some built-in QC tools that verify the images are there and that kind of thing, but a lot of us will just simply take an evening and page through every exhibit and make sure everything comes up. Okay, so end of side note, let's get back to work. I've gone over the first few issues, exhibits with large file size and high page counts, as well as lag time due to poor equipment or file size issues. The next is if you are using an exhibit database for version control of exhibits and your comfort level with unitization. If you have no trial exhibit database, then PDFs can be managed by keeping them all in a central location for team use, so long as the team maintains version control. You're hearing a lot in this class about version control, aren't you? It's important. Last, PDF unitization is easier than TIFF image log file manipulation, so your technical skill set might guide your decision. And yes, there is a choice for none of the above if you're not ready yet. We're going to talk about log files now. You aren't expected to understand how to manipulate log files as a beginner, but you need to understand that this is an important skill to learn, so I'm giving you exposure to it. It's a couple slides, so just hang in there. So a log file tells the database where the image resides. It's not to be confused with the load file, which is the file that contains the metadata and coding to be loaded into the database. It's a standard format for concordance and relativity image loads. So a log file is one of the more straightforward formats for loading of image files. It contains three parts: the alias, the path, and the image name. And there's some common log file extensions. It's basically just a text file, but they put these extensions at the end of them to signify that it's a log file. It's called an OPT or an LOG are the most common ones, but I've also seen XRF or cross-reference and text file. The image key. In concordance and relativity, the image key is the user-defined field in the database that links the database field, the key, and the image. Some trial presentation software can use multiple name references to pull up an exhibit as long as it is entered into the trial presentation database. This is useful for old Bates numbers or other identifying info that might be on the face of the document, like our example before with branding that I gave. So here's a common issue. A legal team member created witness outlines before the exhibit numbers were applied with an old identification numbers. The real solution here is that a legal team member should have swapped out new exhibit numbers so the docs are correctly referenced in court. But this happens all the time, and it can cause issues. The alias. The plain meaning of the alias is that it is the database reference to the image. The image name and alias should usually be the same name, just like exhibit number and exhibit image file name. The alias and image key are the same. The image key is the concordance term and alias is the opticon term. And then per the opticon help file, again, the opticon or concordance image is the companion image viewer for the concordance document review software. This entry is used as a key to the image. Concordance merely needs to store this key in order to reference the image. The key is known as an alias. So you have a database record, and that database record could be called ABC, and the image name is 123. The alias would be ABC, and it just tells matches the database record to the image. And now we're going to hear a little bit about the path. Let's go through the log file basics. The log file actually contains one line like you see above for every image in the database. Again, one line for every image in the database. It is the path from the database record to the image. So the alias or image key takes the path to the image. Now the log file can be tricky. You need to account for every line and ensure there is a matching image for that line. Most trial software has a built-in utility to verify that all images are in the system. You would think every tech would run that thing, right? They don't. And so there's problems. There are a number of other issues that can be created with common tasks like unitization and adding pages to a record, but let's save that conversation for advanced trial presentation. So there's the image key or alias. There's the image and the path. So put another way, the image key or alias follows the path to get to the image. I think it took me like 2 days to make this animation, so soak it in a little bit. It's pretty good. Log file rules, tips, and facts. Each image needs a corresponding image key alias. So good QC is you count the number of lines in the log file and you do a count on the number of images delivered, and those should be equal. It's normally one image key or alias per record, but most trial software will give you some options for multiple references. But typically we only go with one. And in general, image key and alias should match the image name, just like the exhibit name should match the exhibit image file name. Redundancy and quality control. So you should have the redundant ability to load images, either from an external drive, server location, along with some documentation. And there's some QC steps that go along with that. You should check every image by paging through them in the trial exhibits database and in the trial presentation database as well. You should consider an eyes-on compare of electronic versions to paper. So meaning someone looks at the paper and looks at the database record and just verifies that they're the same. The log file to number of images is just making sure that the number of lines matches the number of images, and create documentation of exhibit ranges. Cooperation with opposing. Techs have a conflicting responsibility. They have a responsibility to the court to ensure the smooth sailing and efficient display of evidence. But they also have a responsibility to the legal team and client to represent their best interests during the trial. In general, trial techs from opposing trial teams should assist one another for shared needs like problem equipment or corrupt files, but should keep an eye out for burden shifting, and we're going to talk about that in a second. You should always consult your legal team prior to any decisions. The legal team chooses when and where to wear a white hat. Remain cool, friendly, and ethical at all times. Never let them see you sweat or be stressed. And that goes double for the jury and judge. And again, we're going to talk about burden shifting in a second. And what I mean by consulting the legal team prior to any decisions, don't fire off an email on your own if the opposing counsel isn't complying with the trial management order or the requirements of the case. It's just not your call. You got to let the legal team decide whether they want to go there or not. So some examples of burden shifting or dirty tricks are non-compliance with the trial management order, unethical actions in court. If it's really urgent, send a note over to your legal team. And payment or changes to shared equipment. So sometimes people say, we'll split costs, and then halfway through trial say, we're not going to split costs. So just bring that up with your legal team and let them figure out what the course of action should be. You should be available to assist with that, and lots of times they'll have the tech fire off the email, but just do it under the guidance of the legal team's overall trial presentation strategy. So burden shifting. Burden shifting is where opposing counsel moves the responsibility of conforming with the trial management order on the other party. Smart legal teams put a stop to burden shifting or supplement staff. Again, it is frustrating and can make you very angry, but it might be a strategic case decision to not deal with it. You need to be a team player here, but be sure that the legal team understands the issue and how it is creating a burden and potential service lapse on the trial tech. So examples of this would be where the opposing counsel didn't brand the documents correctly or gave you bad unitization, didn't name the files according to the trial management order, or maybe they just gave you a CD with all the exhibits and gave that CD one exhibit number. All those things have happened. Smart legal teams put a stop to burden shifting or supplement staff. The harm is in the extra burden placed on the tech from opposing counsel. So it takes away the tech's ability to support their own legal team. It's a tactic. Don't fool yourself. It's a tactic. And legal teams that don't confront it really are just shooting themselves in the foot. But if they choose not to confront it, it's not on the trial tech or hot seat to make it their battle. So we're going to turn our attention now to the trial management order. We often call that the TMO. The TMO is an order by the court that describes how the trial will be run. It is often overlooked by trial teams, but it is something where the tech can provide considerable value by reviewing and consulting upon it. Techs would be wise to memorialize in the TMO the exhibit specifications agreed upon in the case, like the format, naming convention, branding requirements, and data file formats. They should also rigorously test the file formats created by opposing counsel before memorializing the agreement. So, quick side note, images and video formats are created by hundreds of different kinds of software and hardware, and they might report that they are a certain format like MPEG-1 for video, but they could be some other format. Same with the various image formats. There is much that can go wrong here, so testing is definitely your friend. You'll want to place the images in your environment to ensure everything works first, and then you sign the trial management order. So, as we just discussed, you want to define the image format, the naming convention, branding requirements. Load file and log file formats are very important. Most generic trial management orders say they can give it to you in any format. The granularity of exhibit exchange, when it will occur, how late can it occur, who does it go to, and any special naming convention for redacted or color records. Always, always, always exchange a test sample of data and make sure it works. Test it like crazy. This is a sample first page of the trial management order. As you can see, it talks about many mundane things like the number of trial days and start date, conferences, and how the trial will proceed. The TMO also gets into the technical details of the case. Here are some sections of the TMO that legal teams might gloss over that could have significant effect on the tech workload and planning. I like to use the TMO to show the legal team what our responsibilities are in the case so that we can begin estimating how long the task will take for appropriate staffing and planning. Sometimes the TMO can be very tricky, like how the deposition testimony section discusses who is responsible for the designations, along with rules of exchange. Have a conversation about how much video will be used and naming conventions. They'll probably welcome your involvement. The TMO has saved me on several occasions when opposing counsel has tried to weasel their way out of compliance or tried to say they asked for a different image format. As if they could just change their mind mid-case and we would have to figure out how to fix it for them. After all, the TMO above says, Trial Director, iPro, Concordance, and Opticon, they should be able to choose any, right? Wrong. Another example was a team that once asked for multi-page TIFF files and then realized it created a huge workflow issue on their back end and trial prep because there were a large number of exhibits that needed to be split to work. We even warned them about this. On the eve of trial, they demanded, rudely, that they were entitled to single-page TIFF files. Our answer was split costs or pound sand. And this is after we offered to give it to them, by the way, for free. Here's some of the terminology used in this week's module. You can go over that on your own time. And now I'm going to talk about the assignment for this week. I know that this module was a long one, and the homework should actually be pretty quick. If you don't have a full version of Adobe Acrobat, I included a link online in the module to a online PDF creator that will allow you to approximate the same functions of Adobe Acrobat. So you should be able to complete the assignment, no problem. So use the sample data provided by Trial Director and do the following to it. You can find the sample data. You should be able to find the sample data at C Sample Data Docs Folder 001. And that's from the Trial Director Sample Data Pack. So first, create a PDF using only the odd-numbered pages of the documents from Demo 01 to Demo 19. It should be 10 pages when complete. Rename that file TX0001. 2. Create a PDF document using only the even-numbered documents from Demo 2 through Demo 20. It should also be 10 pages when complete. Rename that file TX0002. Based on their exhibit names, brand the exhibits in the lower right-hand corner using the following exhibit naming convention: a TX prefix, a 4-digit exhibit number, a dash in the middle between the exhibit number and the page number, and make the page number 4 digits as well. This we call the 44. 4. Redact the signatures and name on the former page number 2 and page 19 of the documents. They're different page numbers now that you have changed them into exhibits. Document the 2 exhibits in a spreadsheet that tracks the BEG exhibit number, the end exhibit number, and the number of pages in the exhibit. And then just imagine doing this hundreds of times throughout a trial, and you'll see how glamorous being a trial tech is. It's actually pretty cool. We have a lot of fun, and it's very interesting. A lot of work, but very interesting. I hope you've enjoyed this module. Again, I know it was a long one. I don't plan them a lot of long PowerPoints to come, so we're going to start getting into the software pretty quick here, but I think we have 1 or 2 more PowerPoints to go, but hopefully they're a lot shorter than this one. I hope you have a great day, and give me a call, an email, or post on the module if you have any questions or comments or need help with the assignment. I'd be happy to help.